wind howled across the open land like something alive, clawing at the walls of the small ranch house and rattling the windows as, if trying to force its way inside. Snow fell sideways, thick and heavy, swallowing the fence lines, the dirt road, and every familiar shape until the world beyond the porch light disappeared into white nothingness. Nights like this were dangerous. Nights like this killed people. Inside the house, the rancher sat alone at the small wooden table, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug that had long since stopped steaming. He had lived on this land for years, long enough to learn that silence could be louder than gunfire and loneliness heavier than any storm. He had learned not to expect visitors, especially not on a night like this. That was why the sound startled him. A knock, not loud, not demanding. Just 3 soft taps, almost lost beneath the wind. He froze, listening, wondering if the storm itself was playing tricks on him. Another knock followed, weaker this time, like someone unsure whether they should even be there. He stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, and crossed the room. Each step felt heavier than the last. People did not wander onto isolated ranches in the middle of a blizzard, unless something had gone terribly wrong. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in like a living thing, stealing the warmth from the room in seconds. Standing on his porch was a woman, her coat thin and torn, snow clinging to her hair and lashes. Her face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. In her arms she held a small child wrapped in a blanket that was far too light for weather like this. The rancher did not speak at first. He simply stared, trying to understand how anyone could still be standing after walking through such a storm. The woman took a shaky breath. She said she knew she should not be there. She said she would leave if he told her to. She said she only needed one night, just one. By morning, she promised, they would be gone. The child did not move. That was what finally broke the silence. The rancher looked down at the small bundle in her arms and felt something twist painfully in his chest. He asked if the child was breathing. The woman nodded quickly, too quickly, and adjusted the blanket as if to hide how still the little body was. He stepped aside. That was all. No speech, no questions, just a step back and an open door. The woman hesitated, as if waiting for him to change his mind, then hurried inside. The warmth hit her like a wave, and her knees buckled. The rancher caught her before she hit the floor, steadying her with hands rough from years of hard work. He shut the door behind them, locking out the storm. Inside, the house was simple. One room, a small kitchen, a fireplace that crackled with burning logs. There was no luxury here, no excess. Everything had a purpose. Everything showed signs of being used until it could be used no more. The rancher helped her to the chair by the fire and knelt to check the child. The little one's cheeks were cold. Too cold, but there was a faint breath, shallow and uneven. The woman's voice shook as she thanked him. She said she had been walking for hours. She said the road disappeared, and the storm came so fast she never saw it coming. She said she did not know where else to go. He did not ask her name. Instead, he added more wood to the fire, poured water into a pot, and placed a blanket around her shoulders. He moved quietly, efficiently, like someone used to surviving without help. That night, he gave them his bed. When she protested, he shook his head and pointed to the child. He said the floor was fine for him. He had slept worse places than that. He said it like it was nothing. The woman's eyes filled with tears she clearly did not want to show. The rancher lay on the floor near the fire, using his coat as a pillow, listening to the wind scream outside. Every so often, he checked to make sure the child was still breathing, that the fire was still strong. He did not sleep much. Near dawn, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind softened, the snow slowed, and the world outside grew quiet in a way that felt almost unreal after so many violent hours. When the rancher finally closed his eyes, exhaustion dragging him under, he had no idea that by the time he woke up, everything in his life would be different. This continues in part 2 of the story. Morning light filtered through the frost-covered window, pale and weak, casting long shadows across the floor. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the house was cold again. The rancher pushed himself up, his body stiff and sore, and turned toward the bed. It was empty. For a moment, panic flared in his chest. He stood quickly, scanning the room. The door was closed. The woman's boots were gone. So was the thin blanket she had wrapped around the child. On the small wooden table, Where the mug had been the night before lay a single object, a photograph. The rancher picked it up, his brow furrowing. The image was old, edges worn and faded. It showed a younger version of himself, standing beside this same ranch house, his arms slung around a man he had not seen in many years. His brother. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. He flipped the photo over. There were words written on the back, careful and deliberate, as if each letter had been chosen with intention. The message explained everything without explaining anything at all. It spoke of debts repaid, of lives crossing paths at the exact moment they were meant to. It said the woman had promised him one night, and he had given her far more than shelter. It said he had given her hope. Before he could make sense of it, there was another sound outside. This time it was not a knock, it was an engine. The rancher stepped onto the porch and shielded his eyes from the morning glare. Down the snow-covered road came a convoy of vehicles, dark and expensive, completely out of place in this forgotten stretch of land. They stopped at his gate. Men in clean coats stepped out, followed by the woman from the night before. She looked different now, stronger, composed. The fear was gone. She met his eyes and smiled. She explained that the ranch once belonged to someone who had saved her life many years ago. She explained that kindness, real kindness, never disappeared. It only waited for the right moment to return. She handed him a folder. Inside were documents transferring ownership of the land, clearing debts he did not even know existed, securing a future he had never dared to imagine. The rancher could not speak. She told him she had not come to test him. She had come because she was lost and he had found her when no one else would. She said that kind of man should never stand alone against the storm. Then she left, just as quietly as she had arrived. The vehicles disappeared down the road, leaving the rancher standing in the snow, clutching a photograph and a future he never asked for. He went back inside, sat at the table, and stared at the fire as it slowly came back to life. He thought about the knock at the door. He thought about how close he had come to ignoring it. And he knew, deep in his bones, that some nights decide the rest of your life. The rancher sat at the table long. After the vehicles disappeared, the photograph still resting in his hands. Outside, the storm had finally released its grip on the land, leaving behind a strange calm that felt almost sacred. Snow covered everything in a smooth white blanket, untouched, as if the night had erased the past and rewritten the world. He should have felt relief. He should have felt excitement. Instead, he felt unsettled. The woman's face kept returning to his mind, not as she looked when she arrived trembling in the storm, but as she stood beside those polished vehicles, calm and certain, as if she belonged to a different world entirely. The contrast made his chest ache. He folded the photograph carefully and placed it back on the table. His brother's face stared up at him from memory, a man full of laughter, full of plans, gone too soon. The rancher had buried that grief deep, convincing himself that solitude was safer than hope. Now hope had walked into his house and left again. Before he could stop it, the day passed slowly. He fed the horses, checked the fences buried in snow, repaired what the storm had damaged, yet every task felt different, like the land itself was watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. That evening, as darkness fell again, he lit the fire and sat alone. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel empty. It felt expectant. He thought about the child, about how small and fragile that life had felt in his arms. He wondered where they were now. Whether the child would remember the warmth of the fire or the man who gave up his bed. Without a second thought, he told himself it did not matter, but it did. The next morning, a man arrived on horseback just after sunrise. He wore a heavy coat and carried himself like someone used to delivering bad news. He introduced himself as a representative of the county. He explained that there had been disputes over the land for years. Old claims, unpaid taxes, paperwork tangled in bureaucracy. The rancher listened quietly. The man stopped, cleared his throat, and said all of it had been resolved overnight. The land was now officially protected. No one could take it. No one could touch it. The rancher nodded once. After the man left, he sat on the porch steps, staring across the fields that stretched farther than he remembered. He realized then that the woman had not just changed his future. She had returned something he had lost. Belief. Days passed. Then weeks. Word began to spread. Travelers stopped by more often. Some came seeking work. Some came seeking shelter. Others came simply because they had heard. There was a ranch where kindness still lived. The rancher did not turn them away. He never spoke about the night of the storm. He never mentioned the photograph or the convoy or the documents tucked safely away. He just worked, listened, and helped when he could. One evening as spring began to melt the snow, a young boy approached him near the fence. The boy asked if it was true that the rancher once saved a woman and her child in the worst storm anyone could remember. The rancher smiled faintly. He said he had only opened a door. The boy asked why. The rancher looked out at the horizon, where the sky burned orange and gold, and answered that some nights give you a choice. You either protect what little you have, or you risk it for someone who has nothing. And sometimes that choice is everything. That night, the rancher placed the photograph in a frame and hung it above the fireplace, not as a reminder of what he gained, but of who he chose to be. Because deep down he knew the truth. The storm did not change his life. His decision did. Spring arrived slowly, like it was unsure whether it was welcome. Snow retreated from the fields inch by inch, revealing dark soil and new grass beneath. The rancher watched the land wake up, and for the first time in many years, he felt as if he was waking up with it. More people came as the weeks passed. Some stayed a night, some stayed longer. A widow with 2 children needed a place to rest while she waited for family. A wounded drifter needed time to heal. A pair of brothers asked for work in exchange for food and shelter. The rancher did not ask for their stories. He understood that everyone carried weight they did not want to explain. The ranch changed. Where once there had been only silence and routine, there was now movement. Laughter sometimes drifted across the yard. Footsteps echoed on the porch. At night, the fire burned brighter, fed by more hands than his own. Yet even as life returned to the land, the rancher could not forget the woman. He wondered if she thought about him, if she ever replayed that night in her mind the way he did. He wondered if she knew how deeply her presence had unsettled him. Not because of what she gave him, but because of what she reminded him was still possible. One afternoon, a letter arrived. There was no return address. The paper was thick, expensive, and folded with care. Inside were only a few lines written in steady ink. The message spoke of gratitude that never fades, of storms survived, of promises kept without words. It said that kindness moves through the world like a quiet current, unseen until it changes the shore. At the bottom was a simple mark, not a name, but a symbol pressed into the page. The rancher held the letter for a long time. That night, he dreamed. He dreamed of the storm again, of the knock at the door, of standing frozen between fear and compassion. But this time when he opened the door, he saw not one figure but many. Faces he recognized, faces he did not, all standing in the cold, waiting. He woke with his heart pounding. The dream stayed with him. It made him realize something he had avoided admitting. The ranch was no longer just his refuge. It had become a place others depended on. Responsibility settled over him like a familiar weight, heavy but honest. Then one evening, months after the storm, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the property as the sun dipped low. A woman, alone, her silhouette unmistakable against the fading light. He knew before she reached the porch. She walked slowly this time, without fear, without urgency. When she stopped in front of him, she smiled the same quiet smile she had worn that morning. The vehicles came. She said she had come to see if the stories were true. She looked around at the ranch, at the repaired fences, the animals, the signs of life everywhere. She said the land felt different, lighter, alive. The rancher asked about the child. She told him the child was strong, that the storm had not taken what it tried to claim. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with everything left unsaid. She told him that wealth could build many things, but it could not replace the moment when a stranger opens a door without knowing who stands on the other side. She said that night had reminded her who she wanted to be. He told her that night had reminded him who he already was. Before she left, she placed her hand on the doorframe, the same place where she had stood shaking months before. She said some places change us forever, even if we only pass through once. When she was gone, the rancher did not feel loss. He felt completion, because he understood now that the night of the storm was never about reward. It was about choice, and the choice continued every single day with every person who arrived in need. The land stretched wide and open before him, full of work, full of promise. And for the first time since his brother's death, The rancher no longer felt alone beneath the sky. The seasons continued to turn, as they always did, but the ranch no longer felt like a place frozen in time. Summer brought long days and open skies, the sound of hooves and voices replacing the old quiet. Crops grew where nothing had grown before. Fences stood straighter. The land responded to care the way people do when they finally believe they matter. The rancher changed too. He still rose before dawn, still worked until his hands ached, still spoke little and listened more. But there was something new in the way he carried himself. He no longer walked the land like a man waiting for something to be taken away. He walked it like a man who understood its value. Travelers continued to come. Some arrived broken, some arrived hopeful. Some arrived with nothing but a story and a need for rest. The rancher offered what he could, never promising more than a meal, a fire, and a place to sleep. For many, that was enough to change the direction of their lives. One night, long after the stars filled the sky, a young man sat beside the rancher near the fire. The young man asked why he helped so many people without expecting anything in return. The rancher stared into the flames and said that once, in the worst storm of his life, someone trusted him with everything they had. He said, "When that happens, you spend the rest of your life trying to be worthy of it." The young man nodded, understanding more than he said. Years passed. The ranch became known not for its size or wealth, but for its reputation. People said it was a place where doors opened when the world closed, a place where storms did not decide who lived and who was forgotten. One winter evening, as snow fell softly rather than violently, the rancher stood at the door and watched the flakes drift down. The night was calm, peaceful. There was no knock this time. But he smiled anyway, because he knew now that even if it came, even if another storm tried to test him, his answer would be the same. He would open the door, not because he expected reward, not because he believed every stranger was good, but because he believed that kindness, once chosen, becomes a way of living. Inside the house, the fire burned steady and warm. On the wall above it hung the old photograph, faded but protected, a reminder of love lost and purpose found. Beside it hung new photographs, faces of people who had passed through, stayed a while and moved on stronger than before. The rancher sat at the table and closed his eyes, listening to the quiet. He was no longer alone, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the light, the world continued to turn, carrying forward every small act of mercy. Every door opened in the dark. Every life changed by one simple decision. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, and that one choice can change everything, take a moment to support this channel by subscribing, because more powerful stories like this are coming, and your support helps keep them alive.